A single dad just wanted to give his daughter a chance to be seen. But when the security guard at the gala denied them entry for not being on the list, everyone in the velvet rope line looked away except for the mysterious woman at the door, who saw the whole thing and changed their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The city lights painted the low-hanging clouds in a hazy orange glow. False dawn that promised nothing but more cold rain. Leo adjusted the rearview mirror for the 10th time, his knuckles white against the cracked plastic. His own reflection stared back, tired eyes, a jaw tight with a tension that had been his constant companion. For the last 3 years, he glanced at the passenger seat where his daughter Maya sat, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She was wearing the dress, a deep sapphire blue that he'd found tucked away in the back of a thrift store. A month ago it had a small tear near the hem, which he'd spent 2 hours meticulously stitching the night before. Using a needle and thread from a cheap hotel sewing kit he kept in the glove box, her hair was braided in a single, thick plait that fell over her shoulder, a style she insisted on because it made her feel like a warrior queen. From one of her favorite books in her lap, she clutched a large manila envelope like it was a shield protecting something precious. Inside was her drawing of vibrant charcoal and pastel creation of a sprawling tree with roots that turned into hands reaching for a star-filled sky. It was for the Children's Art Initiative contest hosted at the annual Starlight Foundation Gala. An event so far removed from their world it felt like a dream or a cruel joke, but the flyer had been taped to the door of the community center, where Maya took her free art classes open to all children in the city. It had Dohad of Lasanta Vlog Spar Case said, a chance for your art to touch the stars. And Maya had latched onto those words with the fierce, unwavering hope only a 9-year-old could possess. Leo's suit felt tight in the shoulders, the fabric thin and unforgiving. It was the only one he owned, purchased for his wedding a decade ago, and worn only twice since once, to the funeral of the woman who had promised him forever, and once now to a place where he knew he didn't belong, but he'd promised Maya they would. Try the car. A dented sedan that coughed more than it purred, sputtered as they turned onto the Grand Avenue leading to the city's most prestigious art museum. Gleaming luxury cars slid past them, silent and sleek like predators in a concrete jungle. Maya pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Wow," she whispered. "Look at all the shiny cars." Leo forced a smile. "Yeah, kiddo, real shiny." He could feel the weight of every passing headlight, a silent judgment on his rusted wheel wells and the duct tape holding his side mirror in place. When they finally pulled up to the museum's entrance, a valet in a crisp red coat glanced at their car, then looked right through them as if they were a smudge on a window he needed to ignore. Leo drove past, finding a spot 2 blocks away in a dimly lit street where the parking was free. After 6, the walk was cold, the wind whipping between the tall buildings and tugging at the edges of Maya's thin coat. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, trying to shield her with his own body, which felt painfully inadequate against the city's indifference. The entrance to the gala was a river of light and sound. People in shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos flowed through the massive glass doors, their laughter echoing like chimes in the cold air. A red velvet rope cordoned off the entrance, guarded by a man with a clipboard and an expression that had been chiseled from stone. Leo took a deep breath, smoothed the front of his worn suit, and took Maya's hand. His palm was sweating. Her small fingers were cold. They stepped into the line, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations lulled for a second. Eyes flicked in their direction, assessing their clothes, their posture, their very right to breathe the same air. It wasn't hostile, just a cold, dismissive curiosity, like a biologist observing a microbe that had wandered into the wrong petri dish. "Next," the guard said, his voice flat. Leo stepped forward, trying to project a confidence he hadn't felt in years. "Good evening," he said. "We're here for the Children's Art Initiative. My daughter has a submission. The guard's eyes didn't even lift from his list name. Leo hesitated. He hadn't thought about a list, the flyer said. Open to all Leo Reyes, he said, his voice steady. Maya Reyes. The guard scanned the page once. Then a second time, his finger tracing the lines of printed names. Not on the list, he said, finally, closing the clipboard with a soft, definitive snap. Leo's stomach dropped. There must be a mistake, the flyer at the community center, it said. But the guard was already looking past him at the couple in line. Behind them, a woman dripping in diamonds, and a man with a laugh that sounded like money. I'm afraid there's no mistake, sir. This is a private event. You need to be on the list to enter. He said it loud enough for those nearby to hear the one-a unspoken words. You don't belong here. Maya's hand tightened in his dad. She whispered her voice, small and fragile. The hope that had been shining in her eyes just moments ago was starting to flicker. He saw it dimming, and it broke something in his chest. He could handle the judgment, the dismissal, the humiliation for himself. But seeing that light go out in his daughter's eyes was a pain so sharp it stole his breath. Please, Leo started his own voice, now pleading, just let her drop off her drawing. That's all we came for. The guard gave a short, humorless laugh. We don't just accept walk-in art, sir. This isn't a post office. The people behind them shifted impatiently. Someone coughed a quiet signal of annoyance. Leo's face burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the cold. He felt the weight of their stares, the silent consensus that he was holding up the line, wasting their precious time. He was about to turn away to scoop Maya up and carry her back into her. The night defeated, when a voice cut through the air, a voice that was quiet but held a resonance that made everyone turn. Excuse me. The woman who spoke was standing just inside the doors, almost hidden in the shadows. She wasn't dressed like the other guests. Her attire was simple, a tailored black dress that was elegant but understated. Her hair was pulled back from her face, revealing a sharp, intelligent gaze. She moved forward with a grace that was both commanding and gentle. Her eyes weren't on the guard or the crowd, they were on Maya's face and the envelope clutched in her small hands. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice calm but with an edge of steel. The guard blinked, startled by the interruption. Miss Vance, he stammered, straightening his posture. I was just enforcing protocol. Then, perhaps your protocol needs to be reviewed, she replied, her gaze finally shifting to him. Because, as the host of this event, I can assure you that any child who comes here with art in their hands is not only on the list, they are the guest of honor. The entire line fell silent. The only sound was the distant murmur of music from inside the gala and the soft thrum of Leo's own heart pounding in his ears. The woman he now knew, as Miss Vance stepped past the velvet rope and knelt down, so she was at eye level with Maya. Her smile was small but genuine, and it reached her eyes, which were a startling shade of green, like a forest after rain. I'm Ilara, she said softly. What did you bring me tonight? Maya looked at her father for permission, and when he gave a slow, dazed nod, she held out the envelope. A tree, she whispered. Its roots are hands. Ilara took the envelope with a reverence that stunned Leo. She didn't just accept it, she held it like it was something precious, something she had been waiting for. Well, she said, standing again, her eyes now on Leo, we can't have a masterpiece like that waiting out in the cold. Won't you both come in? The guard moved aside, without another word, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. Ilara held the rope open for them, and as Leo guided Maya inside, he felt as though he were stepping across a threshold into another world, one where kindness was not a currency but a choice, and where a single, quiet voice could be louder than the judgment of a crowd. The warmth of the museum wrapped around them the moment they stepped inside. A stark contrast to the biting cold they'd left behind. The air was scented with expensive perfume and the faint floral notes of the towering arrangements of white orchids that flanked the grand staircase. A string quartet played in a far corner, their music A delicate silver thread, weaving through the low hum of conversation from the main hall. People in elegant attire moved with a practiced ease. Their laughter, light, and polished their glasses of champagne, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations from the vaulted ceiling. Leo felt a fresh wave of inadequacy wash over him. He instinctively tugged at the lapels of his suit, feeling the worn fabric beneath his fingers. He was a carpenter. A man who knew the feel of sawdust and the scent of wood stain. Not the cold clink of crystal or the hushed reverence of an art gallery filled with the city's elite. He kept a tight grip on Maya's hand, his knuckles brushing against the rough paper of her coat, as if to ground himself in something real. Maya, on the other hand, was completely captivated. Her head was tilted back, her eyes wide, as she took in the soaring marble columns and the vast paintings that adorned the walls. She wasn't intimidated. She was enchanted this way, Alara said, her voice pulling Leo from his thoughts. She hadn't moved far, just a few steps ahead, her posture poised and calm. She didn't seem to notice the curious glances they were receiving from the other guests. Or if she did, she gave no indication. She led them away from the main throng down a quieter hallway, lined with smaller galleries. The noise of the gala faded behind them, replaced by the soft echo of their own footsteps on the polished stone floor. They stopped in front of a large, ornate table where an attendant, in a black uniform, stood beside a tiered display stand. "This is where the submissions are displayed," Alara explained. Gently to Maya, "We'll make sure your tree has the best spot." Right at the front, the attendant. A young woman with a kind smile took the envelope from Maya with practiced care and slid the drawing from its sleeve. She paused for a moment, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at it. "That's beautiful," she murmured before placing it on a small easel at the very center of the display. Maya beamed, her face glowing with a pride so pure it made Leo's throat tighten. He watched her stare at her own artwork. Now part of this glittering world, and for a moment he forgot his own discomfort. He forgot the worn suit and the disapproving stares. He only saw his daughter's dream made real. If only for a night. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, turning to Alara. "You didn't have to do any of that." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I believe I did," she replied. "Now would you and the artist be my guests for the evening? I have a table that's refreshingly quiet and has an excellent view of the dessert bar." Maya's eyes lit up at the mention of dessert, and before Leo could formulate a polite refusal, his daughter had already answered for him. "Yes, please," Leo found himself nodding in silent agreement. Caught in the pull of a current, he had no power to resist. As Alara led them toward a secluded alcove overlooking the main hall, he felt the weight of her quiet intervention settling around him like a borrowed coat. It was warm and unexpected, and he had no idea how he would ever be able to give it back. Ilara's table was tucked away on a small mezzanine that overlooked the sprawling main hall below it. Offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Gala, the sea of people. A swirling kaleidoscope of silk and velvet, the chandeliers casting a diamond dust light over everything. But from up here, the noise was muted. The chaos transformed into a beautiful distant tapestry. The table itself was small and intimate, set for three, with crisp white linen and a single white orchid in a slender vase. It was an oasis of calm in a desert of social performance. Leo guided Maya into a chair. Before taking his own, his movements were stiff and uncertain. He felt like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong set without a script. His hands, calloused from years of working with wood, felt rough and out of place against the smooth, polished surface of the table. He kept them in his lap, trying to remember the last time he'd sat at a table that didn't have a faint layer of sawdust on it. Alara took the seat across from them, moving with a quiet confidence that seemed to be her default setting. She didn't sit like someone who owned the room, but like someone who was comfortable with its silence. A waiter appeared almost instantly. his presence so discreet he seemed to materialize from the shadows. He poured water from a crystal pitcher and offered them small leather-bound menus. Maya stared at the menu, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's all in swirly letters," she whispered to Leo. "I don't know what any of it means." Ilara smiled gently. "It's just fancy for tiny food," she said, pointing to one of the items. "That's a very small hamburger, and that's a little stick with cheese and fruit on it." Her tone wasn't condescending. It was helpful, conspiratorial, as if she were letting them in on a secret. Maya giggled, pointing a finger at a long, indecipherable word. "What about that one?" That Ilara leaned closer. "Is a very complicated way of saying chocolate pudding." Maya's eyes went wide, and she looked at Leo with a hopeful plea. He couldn't possibly deny the waiter returned to take their order, and Ilara spoke for them with an easy authority, ordering a selection of the tiny foods and 2 chocolate puddings, one for her and one for Maya. She looked at Leo as if to ask what he wanted, but he just shook his head slightly. "I'm fine," he said quietly. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Ilara didn't push. She simply nodded to the waiter, who then disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived. The silence that settled between them was different. Now, not awkward, but expectant. Maya was busy drawing on a napkin with a crayon she'd produced from her pocket, completely at ease in her own world, leaving the 2 adults to navigate the space between them. "You're a carpenter," Ilara said. It wasn't a question but a statement. Her eyes flicked to his hands, which he'd unconsciously placed on the table. "Yeah," Leo replied, surprised. She'd noticed I build things, furniture mostly. Custom pieces, whatever. Pays the bills. She nodded slowly. "I appreciate things made by hand. There's an honesty to them." He looked at her, trying to read past the polite surface. Her face was a mask of serene composure, but her eyes held a depth that hinted at something more. Something quieter, and perhaps lonelier than her surroundings, suggested. "What do you do?" he asked before he could stop himself. The question felt too direct, too personal, but he needed to place her in his own mental landscape. Ilara's smile was faint, almost sad. "I run this," she said with a vague gesture to the Gala around them. "The foundation, the fundraisers, the asking people for money so we can give it to other people. It's not as honest as building a chair. A chair is real. It does what it's meant to do. It holds you up." Her words hung in the air between them. A strange and unexpected confession. Leo didn't know what to say to that. He had come here expecting judgment and found a strange sort of kinship instead. The waiter arrived with a silver tray laden with small, intricate dishes, setting them down with practiced silence. Maya immediately reached for a miniature grilled cheese sandwich, her earlier shyness forgotten in the face of food. Her small face lit up with delight as she took a bite, humming with satisfaction. The sound was so pure, so out of place in the refined quiet of the mezzanine, that it made both adults smile, and in that shared smile, the first fragile thread of a real connection began to form, bridging the gap between their 2 disparate worlds. As Maya became more engrossed in her culinary adventure, the focus of the conversation shifted back to the 2 adults. Leo found himself relaxing fractionally, the knot of anxiety in his chest loosening its grip ever so slightly. There was something about Ilara's calm demeanor that was disarming. She didn't ask the kind of probing questions that made him feel like he was being evaluated. She asked about his work, about the types of wood. He preferred the challenges of creating something from a client's vague idea. She listened with a focused intensity that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in a long time. "You must be very proud of her," Ilara said, her gaze drifting to Maya, who was now attempting to build a small tower out of fruit skewers. "More than you know," Leo said, his own voice softening as he watched his daughter. "It's just been us for a while now. Her mother passed away 3 years ago." There was no self-pity in his tone, just a statement of fact, a piece of his history that shaped every part of his present. Ilara's expression softened, and for the first time he saw a flicker of genuine, unguarded emotion in her eyes, a deep well of empathy that seemed to momentarily overwhelm her practiced composure. "I'm very sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The words were simple, but they landed with a weight that other more elaborate condolences never had. She didn't offer platitudes or change the subject. She just sat with the truth of his loss for a moment, letting the silence hold it with a quiet respect. He found himself wanting to know more about her, not about the foundation or the fundraisers, but about the woman who sat across from him looking as lonely as he often felt. "So you're always the host at these things?" he asked, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Always," she replied with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 such events. "I grew up in this world. My father started the foundation. It was his legacy, his passion. He believed that art and beauty could change lives, and I believe that too. It's the getting people to pay for it. That's the exhausting part." She picked up her water glass and stared into it as if it held some profound truth. "The politics, the handshakes, the smiling, until your face feels like it's going to crack. It's a profound of the second performance. And some nights I get tired of the stage." The honesty of her admission was startling. It was the kind of thing people thought but never said. Especially not to a stranger in a worn-out suit. It made him feel less like an intruder and more like a fellow traveler who had stumbled upon a shared moment of weariness. "You don't seem like the type to get tired," he said. It was a genuine observation. She carried herself with an unshakable poise that seemed immune to fatigue. Looked up, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "That's part of the performance too," she said. The food was cleared away, and the promised chocolate pudding arrived in a delicate glass cup, topped with a single perfect raspberry. Maya's gasp of delight was audible, and she dug in with an enthusiasm that was infectious. Ilara watched her with a fond smile, her earlier melancholy seeming to lift in the presence of the child's uncomplicated joy. As the night began to wind down, the crowd in the hall below started to thin. Leo knew they couldn't linger much longer. He felt a pang of regret, which surprised him. He had been so desperate to escape this world just a few hours ago, and now a part of him was reluctant to leave the quiet sanctuary of their table. He glanced at Ilara, wanting to thank her again, but words felt clumsy and inadequate. What she had given them tonight wasn't just entry to a gala. It was a moment of grace, a reprieve from the harsh realities of their life. "You have her eyes," he said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could censor them. Ilara looked up, startled. "Who's Maya's?" he clarified. "When she's excited, they light up from the inside, just like yours did." "When you talked about your father." Ilara's hand froze mid-air, the spoon she was holding hovering over her own untouched pudding. A complex array of emotions washed over her face. Surprise, vulnerability, a flicker of something that looked like pain. She looked away for a moment, her composure finally cracking at the edges. "No one's ever said that to me before," she said, her voice thin and tight. "Most people just see my father's name when they look at me." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, understanding what it felt like to be seen only for what you represented, rather than for who you were. The moment stretched between them, thick with unspoken understanding, a quiet recognition of two souls who were both, in their own way, trying to build something real in a world that often felt hollow. The gala was ending. The string quartet had packed their instruments away, and the last of the guests were drifting toward the exit, their laughter echoing in the now cavernous hall. Maya was beginning to wilt her head, nodding slightly, her eyelids heavy with sleep. It was time to go. Ilara stood as they did her grace, unwavering even at the end of a long night. "I'll have my driver take you home," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Leaving no room for polite refusal, Leo opened his mouth to protest, to insist they could walk to their car, but the thought of navigating the cold, dark streets with a sleeping child was more than he could face. Tonight, he gave a single reluctant nod. "Thank you," he said the words, feeling small and insufficient for the kindness she had shown them. They walked back through the now empty hallways, the silence amplifying. The soft click of Alara's heels on the marble floor. Maya was half asleep, leaning heavily against Leo's side, her small hand still clutching his as they reached the grand entrance, the same guard who had denied them entry just hours before now stood at attention, his face a mask of polite deference. He opened the door for them without a word, his eyes carefully avoiding. Leo's sleek black car was waiting at the curb, its engine humming a low, quiet rhythm. The driver, a man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the back door with a practiced efficiency that spoke of years of service. Leo carefully buckled a drowsy Maya into the plush leather seat before sliding in beside her. The door closed with a soft thud, sealing them in a world of quiet luxury. The car smelled of leather and something faintly like rain. Alara slid into the front passenger seat, turning to face them. "Where to?" she asked. Leo gave her the address of their small apartment on the other side of town, a place that felt a million miles away from the opulence of the museum. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly, they barely felt it move. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and red against the tinted windows. Maya's head came to rest on Leo's shoulder, her breathing evening out into the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep. He looked down at her, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the dashboard lights, and his heart ached with a love so fierce. It was almost painful. He had wanted to give her one night of magic, and this woman, a complete stranger, had done just that. He looked at Alara's reflection in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, her profile etched against the passing city lights. She looked beautiful but also profoundly lonely, like a star that shone brightly but had no planet to warm. Leo felt an unexpected urge to say something to break the silence, to thank her for more than just the car ride. But the words wouldn't come. What could he possibly say that would convey the depth of his gratitude? He was a carpenter. She was a philanthropist. Their worlds were destined to collide for one brief night and then drift apart. That was the natural order of things. But as the car carried them further into the night, away from the glitter and the gold, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something that had shifted the axis of his quiet world. In a way he was not yet prepared to understand, the car glided to a stop in front of a modest brick apartment building on a street where the streetlights flickered with an unsteady hum. The building was old, its edges softened by time and neglect. It was a world away from the gleaming marble of the museum, and the contrast was jarringly apparent in the quiet hum of the luxury car's engine. "This is us," Leo said, his voice low, as he gently roused a sleeping Maya. From his shoulder the driver was already out of the car, holding the door open for them with the same silent efficiency as before. Leo unbuckled Maya and lifted her into his arms. She was a dead weight, her body warm and pliant against his. He stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk, the cold night air, a stark reminder of where they were and who they were. Alara stepped out of the car as well, her simple black dress and elegant heels looking entirely out of place against the gritty backdrop of his neighborhood. She didn't seem to notice or care. Her arms were crossed against the chill, but her gaze was fixed on him and Maya with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply compelling. "Thank you again for everything," Leo said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had to offer. She gave a small nod. Of course he turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Leo," she said his name softly, and he turned back. She was holding a small, elegant card in her hand. It was thick and cream-colored, with her name embossed in a simple gold script. No title, no company name, just Alara Vance. She held it out to him. "I'd like to see the warrior queen's father again," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "If you'd be open to it. Just coffee, no galas." "I promise." Leo stared at the card. Then, at her. He was a man who knew his place in the world, a world of hard work, honest labor, and the constant, quiet struggle to make ends meet. She belonged to a world. He had only glimpsed a world of power, influence, and effortless grace. Taking the card felt like a risk, like accepting an invitation to a place he wasn't built for. But then he looked down at Maya, sleeping peacefully in his arms. Her face untroubled by the worries that plagued him, and he knew he couldn't let fear make his decisions for him. He reached out and took the card, his rough, calloused fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through him, unexpected and startling. "I'd like that," he said, his voice more certain than he felt. She smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her face, making her look younger and less burdened. "Good," she said then. She slipped back into the car and was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as she had appeared. Leo stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the card clutched in his hand, feeling the crisp edges against his palm. He looked up at the blank, flickering streetlight, then at the door to his apartment, and for the first time, in a very long time, he felt the faintest glimmer of something he had long since given up on hope. The apartment was quiet and still when they got inside, the air thick with the familiar scent of old books and the faint aroma of the spaghetti they'd had for dinner 2 nights ago. Leo laid Maya gently in her bed, pulling the thin patchwork quilt up to her chin. She murmured something in her sleep, a soft jumble of words that sounded like stars and pudding, and he smiled, his heart aching with a tender love. He went back to the living room and sank onto the worn couch, the springs groaning in protest. He placed Alara's card on the small coffee table, which he'd built himself from reclaimed pine. The elegant, cream-colored rectangle looked comically out of place next to a stack of overdue library books and a chipped ceramic mug. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into his bones. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions, humiliation, gratitude, confusion, and a strange sense of connection to a woman he had no right to feel connected to. He had spent the last 3 years building a fortress around his heart, a fortress designed to protect both him and Maya from any more loss, any more pain. It was a lonely existence, but it was a safe one. Alara, with her quiet kindness and sad eyes, had breached those walls without even trying. She had seen past his worn suit and his rough hands, and had looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. That was a dangerous thing, a very dangerous thing. For a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, he picked up the Brahms-Klam card again, tracing the elegant script of her name with his thumb. It felt heavy in his hand, heavy with possibility and risk. He knew what he should do. He should throw it away. He should forget about the woman from the gala and return to the safety of his predictable life. But he couldn't. The image of her kneeling to speak to Maya, her face illuminated by the soft light of the museum, her eyes filled with a surprising warmth, was seared into his memory. He couldn't just erase that. He leaned back, his head resting against the back of the couch, and closed his eyes. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he was brave enough to step out of his fortress and risk feeling something again. But as he drifted off to sleep with the city's distant hum as his lullaby, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to throw the card away. Not yet. The next morning, Leo woke to the smell of rain and the soft gray light of a city morning filtering through the dusty windows of his apartment. His back ached from sleeping on the couch, and his mind felt groggy with the remnants of strange dreams filled with chandeliers and whispered conversations. He sat up slowly, his eyes landing on the cream-colored card, still sitting on the coffee table. It hadn't been a dream, it had all been real. He stood and stretched the stiffness in his muscles, a familiar reminder of a life lived on his feet in the kitchen. Put on a pot of coffee, the cheap generic kind he bought in bulk. But this morning, its bitter aroma was a comfort, a return to the familiar rhythms of his life. Maya was still asleep, her door slightly ajar. He peeked in and saw her curled up in her bed, her face peaceful, her drawing of the tree now taped to the wall above her head, a proud testament to her night of magic. Seeing her like that, so content and untroubled, solidified something in him. He had done the right thing by taking her to the gala, even if it had ended in a way he never could have predicted. After pouring himself a mug of coffee, he sat down at the small kitchen table, his worn copy of a woodworking manual open in front of him, but he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Elara, to the quiet intensity of her gaze, to the unexpected vulnerability in her voice. He had her pegged as just another wealthy philanthropist, aloof and detached from the real world. But she had been anything. But she had been kind, perceptive, and surprisingly down to earth. He picked up the card again, turning it over in his hands. What did she want from him? Was this just an act of pity? A way to assuage some rich person's guilt? Or was it something more? Something genuine? His rational mind told him to be cautious, that people from her world didn't just wander into his without an agenda, but his heart, a part of him he had long kept dormant, whispered a different story. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had seen something in him that he had forgotten. Was there a knock on the door? Startled him. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it to find his neighbor, Mrs. Mann. Gable, a kindly old woman with a cloud of white hair and a perpetually worried expression on her face. "Morning, Leo," she said, peering past him into the apartment. "I saw you come in late last night. Is everything all right? You had a fancy car drop." "You off?" she said, her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and nosiness. Leo managed a small smile. "Just a work thing, Mrs. Gable, nothing to worry about." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go, handing him a small plate covered in foil. "I made extra banana bread," she said. "Thought you and Maya might like some." Leo took the plate, the warmth seeping through the foil into his hands. "Thanks, Mrs. Pride." "Gable, that's really kind of you." As he closed the door and set the plate on the counter, he was struck by the simple, unpretentious kindness of the gesture. It was a world away from the calculated philanthropy of the gala, but in that moment, it felt just as meaningful, and it made him think of Elara again, wondering if her gesture had been just as simple, just as honest, just a person. Seeing another person and wanting to help, he looked at the card again and made a decision. He would call her. He didn't know what he would say or where it would lead, but he knew he had to find out if the woman he had met last night was as real as she had seemed. Elara sat in her office on the top floor of the Vance Foundation, building a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. The room was a monument to minimalist elegance, all clean lines, polished chrome, and muted colors. It was a space designed to impress, to command respect. But to Elara, it had always felt more like a cage, a beautiful, sterile cage. She stared at the phone on her desk, a sleek piece of technology that connected her to a global network of donors, politicians, and business leaders. But the only call she was waiting for was from a carpenter with kind eyes and calloused hands. She hadn't been able to get him out of her mind since the gala. His quiet dignity in the face of humiliation, his fierce, protective love for his daughter, his surprising perceptiveness. It had been years since anyone had looked at her and seen anything other than her name and her net worth. He had seen her. He had seen the flicker of her father's spirit in her eyes. And in doing so, he had reminded her of a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. Her assistant, a brisk, efficient woman named Sarah, entered the room with a tablet in her hand. "Miss Vance, your 2 o'clock with the museum board has been confirmed, and the preliminary budget for the new literacy program is ready for your review." Elara nodded without looking up. "Thank you, Sarah. Is there anything else?" Her assistant hesitated for a moment, a rare crack in her professional facade. "Are you all right, Miss Vance? You seem distracted." Elara finally looked up and offered a small, tired smile. "I'm fine, Sarah, just a long night." She was lying. Of course she wasn't fine. She was a mess of conflicting emotions. a tangle of hope and fear. She had taken a risk by giving Leo her card, a risk that went against every rule she had set for herself after her last disastrous attempt at a personal life. But there was something about him, something so fundamentally real and grounded that made her want to break all the rules. She looked at Maya's drawing, which now sat in a simple silver frame on her desk. The vibrant colors and hopeful imagery were a stark contrast to the muted tones of her office. It was a reminder of a different kind of world, a world where magic was found in a box of crayons, and love was a force strong enough to hold up the stars. The phone on her desk rang, and her heart gave a sudden leap. She snatched it up, her voice a little too breathless as she answered. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end. Then a man's voice, quiet and a little hesitant, came through the line. "Ilara, it's Leo Reyes from the Gala last night." Ilara closed her eyes, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Leo," she said his name, a soft exhalation of relief. "I'm glad you called." She had no idea where this was going, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt a thrill of anticipation, a sense of stepping into the unknown, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of excitement. She was tired of her gilded cage, and maybe, just maybe, this carpenter from the other side of town was the one who held the key. The coffee shop was a small, unassuming place, tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The air inside was thick with the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans and the quiet murmur of conversations. It was the kind of place where people lingered over their laptops, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their screens, a world away from the hushed reverence of the museum or the corporate chill of Ilara's office. Leo felt more at home here. He had chosen the place deliberately, a neutral ground where he wouldn't feel so out of his depth. He sat at a small table in the back, a chipped ceramic mug warming his hands, his eyes flicking to the door. Every time the little bell above it chimed he was nervous, his heart thumping a steady rhythm. Against his ribs, he had replayed their phone conversation a dozen times in his head. Her voice had been warm and welcoming, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a mistake. What could a woman like her possibly want? With a man like him, she arrived a few minutes late, looking flustered and apologetic. She was dressed in simple jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, without the elegant dress and the formal setting. She looked younger, more approachable, more real. She spotted him and her face broke into a relieved smile. "Sorry," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "The traffic was a nightmare." Leo just nodded. "It's fine, thanks for coming." She ordered a black coffee, and they sat in a comfortable silence. For a moment, the only sound, the clink of spoons against ceramic and the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. So Ilara said, finally, breaking the silence, "How is the warrior queen?" This morning Leo smiled. "She's good." She told everyone at school that she went to a castle and ate magic pudding. "She thinks you're a fairy godmother." Ilara laughed, a genuine warm sound that made a few people at the nearby tables look up. "I'm not sure about that, but I'm glad she had a good time." He hesitated for a moment, then decided to just say what was on his mind. "Look, Ilara, I'm not sure why you wanted to see me again. I'm just a guy trying to make ends meet. Don't move. In your circles, I don't have anything to offer you." Her smile faded, and she looked at him with a serious expression that made his breath catch in his throat. "Leo, you don't have to offer me anything," she said, her voice low and earnest. I didn't ask you to coffee because of what you have or don't have. I asked you because I enjoyed talking to you, because you were real with me, because you have a daughter who sees the world in a way I wish I still could." Her words were a balm to his bruised pride, a quiet affirmation that he had been seen for who he was, not for what he lacked. He let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "So what do you do when you're not being a fairy godmother?" he asked, his tone a little lighter. Now she stirred her coffee, a small smile playing on her lips. "I read a lot. I walk in the park. I try to find quiet places in a city that never stops being loud, and I run a foundation that tries to make the world a little bit better, one art class at a time. It sounded simple, but he knew it was more complicated than that. He could see the weight of her responsibilities in the faint lines around her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders. She was a woman who carried a world on her back. Even if she wore it with grace, they talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. They talked about books and music, about the challenges of raising a child on your own, about the simple pleasure of a well-made piece of furniture. Leo found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in a long time. He told her about his late wife, about their shared dream of opening their own workshop, about the grief that still ambushed him in quiet moments. She listened with a compassionate stillness that made him feel safe to be vulnerable. When it was time to go, they stood outside the coffee shop, the city's noise, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy they had shared. "I'd like to see your workshop sometime," Ilara said, her eyes hopeful. "If you'd let me." Leo didn't hesitate this time. "Yeah," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I'd like that," as he walked away. He felt a lightness in his step that had been missing for years. He didn't know where this was going, but he was no longer afraid to find out he was just a carpenter and she was a philanthropist. But in that small coffee shop, they had been something else. Entirely two people finding a sliver of connection in a world that often felt disconnected. And for now, that was more than enough. The workshop was Leo's sanctuary, a large, dusty space at the back of a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town. The air was thick with the scent of pine and cedar, and the floor was permanently covered in a fine layer of sawdust. The space was organized in a way that would look like chaos to anyone else, but to Leo, every tool had its place, every stack of wood its purpose. It was a world away from the polished perfection of Ilara's life, and he was nervous about her seeing it. She arrived on a sunny afternoon a few days later, dressed in practical boots and a simple jacket that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than style. She stepped inside and her eyes widened, not with judgment, but with a genuine sense of wonder. "It smells amazing in here," she said, taking a deep breath like a forest. Leo chuckled. "It's a step up from the smell of the rendering plant down the street." She walked slowly through the space, her fingers trailing over a half-finished tabletop, her gaze lingering on the tools that hung in neat rows on the wall. "This is where you create," he nodded. "It's where I feel most like myself." She turned to him, a soft smile on her face. I can see that Maya was there too, sitting at a small workbench Leo had built for her. She was meticulously painting a small wooden bird he had carved her, eyes focused in concentration. She looked up when Ilara approached, and her face broke into a wide grin. "Miss Ilara, you came?" Ilara knelt beside her. "What are you making a sky bird?" she said, holding it up. "For inspection. It's for my mom's garden." Ilara's eyes softened. "It's beautiful, Maya. I bet she'll love it." Leo watched them interact, a warmth spreading through his chest. Ilara had a natural way with Maya, a gentle patience that couldn't be faked. She wasn't just being polite, she was genuinely interested in the small world of a 9-year-old girl. Ilara spent over an hour in the workshop, asking Leo about his process, about the different types of wood, about the stories behind the pieces he was working on. He showed her a rocking chair he was restoring for an elderly client, a delicate piece with intricate carvings that had been worn smooth by time. He showed her a set of bookshelves he was building for a local library, a project he had taken on for a fraction of his usual fee, because he believed in the cause. She didn't just look at the pieces, she touched them, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood as if she could to feel the history within them. "You have a gift, Leo," she said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "It's not just furniture you're building, You're building memories, he shrugged. I just like working with my hands. It's simple. It's honest. She met his eyes, and he saw a flicker of the same sadness he had seen at the gala. I think simple and honest are the most complicated things to find in this world. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. Thank you for showing me this, she said. It felt like you were showing me a part of yourself. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, watching her go as the sound of her car faded into the distance. He looked around his workshop, the familiar space, suddenly feeling different, a little brighter, a little less lonely. He had let someone into his sanctuary, and instead of judging it, she had seen the beauty in its imperfection, and that more than anything made him believe that this connection between them might be just as real and just as beautiful. The days that followed settled into a new and surprising rhythm. Ilara became a quiet but constant presence in their lives. She would show up at the workshop with dediu tejas blank, coffee and pastries, sitting for hours, while Leo worked content to just be in the same space. She would help Maya with her homework, her patient explanations of long division, a welcome relief for Leo, who had always struggled with math. They two went for walks in the park, Maya running ahead to chase pigeons, while Leo and Ilara followed at a slower pace. Their conversations meandering from the mundane to the profound, they discovered a shared love for old black and white movies, a mutual disdain for cilantro, and a similar sense of feeling like they were on the outside looking in, even when they were in the center of their own lives. Leo found himself looking forward to her visits more than he cared to admit. He liked the sound of her laugh, the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the way she made him feel like the most interesting man in the world. Just by listening to him, he was starting to let his guard down to believe that this thing between them, whatever it was, might actually be real. One rainy Saturday, she invited them to her apartment for a movie marathon. Leo was hesitant. He had seen her world from the outside, but stepping into it felt like a different level of intimacy. But Maya's enthusiastic pleading was impossible to resist. So he found himself standing in the private elevator of a skyscraper that touched the clouds, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. Her apartment was exactly as he had imagined, and yet nothing like it. It was vast and minimalist, with breathtaking views of the city, but it was also filled with books, stacks of them. On every available surface there were framed photographs on the walls, not of celebrities or politicians, but of landscapes, a windswept coastline, a misty forest, a field of wildflowers. There was a comfortable-looking couch with a worn throw blanket draped over it, and a grand piano in the corner with a sheet of music left open. It wasn't a showroom, it was a home, a lonely home perhaps, but a home. Nonetheless, they watched an old Cary Grant movie. Maya curled up between them on the couch, a big bowl of popcorn in her lap. Halfway through the movie, she fell asleep, her head resting on Ilara's shoulder. Leo looked over and saw Ilara staring down at Maya, her expression a mixture of tenderness and a deep, ached longing. It was a look. He recognized a look he had seen in his own reflection. Many times he, gently, lifted Maya into his arms, intending to take her home, but Ilara stopped him. "Let her sleep," she whispered. "There's a guest room. You can both stay." He should have said no. He should have maintained the boundaries he had so carefully constructed. But looking at Ilara's hopeful face, he found he couldn't. He laid Maya in the guest bed, a room that was bigger than his entire living room, and then returned to the living room where Ilara was standing by the window looking out at the rain-streaked city lights. "I haven't had people in this apartment in a very long time," she said, without turning around. "It's always been my fortress, a place to hide from the world." He stood beside her, close enough to feel the close warmth radiating from her but not touching. "You don't have to hide from me, Ilara." She turned to him, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. "I know," she said, "and that's what scares me the most." The rain continued to fall, a gentle rhythm against the glass, cocooning them in a world of their own. In the quiet intimacy of that moment, surrounded by the city's glittering lights, Leo knew he was in trouble. The good kind of trouble. The kind that makes you feel alive for the first time in years. He was falling for her, and he had a feeling she was falling for him too, and for once he wasn't afraid of the fall. Their relationship deepened in the weeks that followed, evolving from a fragile connection into a steady, comforting presence in each other's lives. Ilara became a regular fixture at the workshop. Her elegant car, a familiar sight in the dusty industrial lot, she would bring lunch from a small deli she had discovered nearby, and they would eat together at Leo's workbench. Their conversation easy and unforced, she never shied away from the sawdust or the noise. She seemed to find a sense of peace in the honest labor that surrounded her. Leo, in turn, started to venture more into her world. He and Maya would have dinner at her apartment once a week. Maya treating the vast space like her own personal playground, while Leo and Ilara cooked together their movements in the kitchen, a clumsy but joyful dance. He learned that she was a terrible cook, but a fantastic baker. Her cookies, a source of constant delight for Maya. He learned that she had a wicked sense of humor that only came out when she felt truly comfortable, and he learned that she was carrying a weight of expectation and responsibility that would have crushed a lesser person. One evening as they were cleaning up after dinner, he found her staring at a framed photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of a handsome, silver-haired man with a commanding presence and the same sad eyes as Ilara. "My father," she said, her voice soft. He was a brilliant man, a visionary, but he was better at building an empire than he was at building a home. He put all his dreams into the foundation, into the idea of leaving a legacy, but he forgot to live in the present. He looked at her, seeing the familiar ache of loss in her eyes. "I get that," he said quietly. "When you lose someone you spend so much time looking back, you forget to look forward." She turned to him, a grateful smile on her face. "You always know what to say." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I just know what it feels like." They were standing close now, the space between them charged with an unspoken energy. He could smell the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle mix of vanilla and something floral. He could see the flicker of the city lights reflected in her eyes. He wanted to kiss her more than he had wanted anything in a long time, but he held back, afraid of moving too fast, of misreading the signals. But then she leaned in her hand, coming up to gently cup his cheek. Her touch was a spark that ignited a fire he had long thought extinguished. His own hand came up to cover hers, and he leaned down, closing the pride distance between them. The kiss was soft and tentative. At first a question, a gentle exploration. But then it deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. A silent affirmation of everything that had been growing between them in the stolen moments and quiet conversations. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other's. Neither of them said a word. There was no need. The silence was filled with the promise of something new, something real, something that felt a lot like love. The next day, a sleek black car pulled up to the workshop. It wasn't Ilara's. The man who stepped out was tall and imposing, dressed in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. His face was a mask of polite indifference, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Leo watched him from the doorway, a sense of unease settling in his gut. "Mr. Reyes," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I'm Julian Croft. I represent the Vance family interests." Ilara's family. Leo's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Is everything all right?" Mr. Croft gave a humorless smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That depends. We've been made aware of your association with Miss Vance. While her personal life is her own concern, the board has a vested interest in protecting the foundation's reputation." Leo's jaw clenched. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," he said, his tone still maddeningly calm. "I'm simply stating a fact. A relationship between the head of the Vance Foundation and a man of your circumstances could be misconstrued by the press, by our donors. It could be seen as a liability." Leo's pride flared. He was a good man, a hard-working father. He Was not a liability. I think you should leave, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Croft didn't flinch. He simply placed a business card on the workbench. I'm sure you'll make the right decision, he said before turning and walking away, leaving Leo standing in a cloud of sawdust and indignation. The encounter left a bitter taste in Leo's mouth. He didn't tell Alara about it when she came by later that day. He didn't want to worry her. He didn't want to give Croft the satisfaction of creating a rift between them. But the man's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the chasm that separated their worlds. He started to notice the subtle signs of that chasm everywhere he went. A news article about a fundraiser Alara had hosted with a guest list that read like a who's who of the global elite. A passing comment from a client about the Vance family's vast real estate holdings. A glossy magazine cover at the grocery store with Alara's face on it. Her smile. Perfect. Her eyes empty, he began to feel a growing sense of insecurity, a feeling he hadn't experienced since the early days of his grief. He was a simple man with a simple life, and he was falling in love with a woman who lived in the world he could never truly be a part of. He started to pull back just a little, not consciously, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. He would let her calls go to voicemail for a little longer. He would make excuses to cut their evenings short. He would find reasons to be busy at the workshop when he knew she was planning to visit. He was building his walls back up brick by painful brick. Not because he didn't love her, but because he was terrified of the day her world would inevitably swallow his whole and leave him with nothing but the memory of what he had lost. Alara felt the shift immediately. Leo's growing distance was a subtle chill in the air, a quiet retreat that left a void in its wake. His laughter was a little more forced, his smiles a little less frequent, his touch a little more hesitant. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how to ask without sounding accusatory. She tried to bridge the gap, suggesting a weekend trip to the coast, a place where they could escape the city and be just Leo and Alara. But he had demurred, citing a backlog of work at the shop. She tried to talk to him about it one evening as they sat in his small living room, the silence between them, stretching thin and tight. Leo, is everything okay? You seem distant. He had avoided her gaze, focusing on a loose thread on the couch. Cushion, I'm fine, just tired, a lot on my mind. She knew it was a lie, a polite deflection, designed to keep her at arm's length, and it hurt more than an angry outburst would have. She felt like she was losing him, and she didn't know why. She confided in her only real friend, a sharp-witted art curator named Isabel, who had known her since before she was Alara Vance, philanthropist extraordinaire. He's pulling away, and I don't know what I did wrong, Alara said, her voice thick with unshed tears, as they sat in Isabel's sun-drenched apartment. It's not what you did, darling. It's who you are, Isabel said gently. You're a Vance. You come with a universe of expectations and complications. He's probably just scared, and can you blame him? Isabel's words were a painful truth. Alara had tried so hard to be just. Alara to shed the weight of her name and her fortune, but it was a part of her she could never fully escape. She had inadvertently dragged Leo into her complicated world, and now he was drowning in it. That night she went home to her silent penthouse and made a decision. She couldn't let him go without a fight. She had to show him that their two worlds could coexist, that their love was stronger than the chasm that separated them. She had an idea, a crazy, audacious idea, that was either going to bring them closer together or push them apart for good. She spent the next week making arrangements, pulling strings and calling in favors she had never used for personal reasons before. She was orchestrating a collision of their two worlds, a grand gesture designed to prove that he belonged by her side, not as a liability, but as an equal. The annual Vance Foundation Artisans Grant was one of the most prestigious awards in the Bading country, a life-changing sum of money given to a single craftsman whose work embodied the principles of honesty, integrity, and innovation. The winner was chosen by a secret committee of experts, and the announcement was made at a formal reception attended by the city's most influential patrons of the art. Leo had heard of the grant. Of course, it was the stuff of legends in the woodworking community, but he had never dreamed of applying. He was just a small-time carpenter, trying to keep his head above water a week after his encounter with Julian Croft. A formal invitation arrived at his workshop, an elegant cream-colored envelope with the Vance Foundation's crest embossed in gold. It was an invitation to the artisan's grant reception. He almost threw it away, assuming it was a mistake, but then he saw a small handwritten note at the bottom of the invitation. "Please come, I want you to be there." It was in Alara's familiar script. He was torn apart. Of him wanted to go to see her, to break through the walls he had built between them, but another part of him was terrified of stepping back into her world, of facing the judgment and the pity he had felt at the gala. He spent the next few days in a state of turmoil, his work suffering as his mind wrestled with the decision. Maya was the one who ultimately made up his mind. "For him, you should go, Daddy," she said one evening, as he tucked her into bed. "Miss Alara misses you, I can tell, because you haven't been smiling as much." Her simple, innocent wisdom was a spear to his heart. He knew she was right. He was miserable without Alara, and hiding from his feelings wasn't protecting anyone. It was just prolonging the pain. He decided to go. He dusted off his one good suit, polished his worn dress shoes, and prepared himself for a night of feeling out of place. But he was doing it for her, for them, for the slim hope that they could find a way back to each other. The reception was held in a different wing of the same museum as the gala, a grand hall with soaring ceilings and walls, adorned with modern art. The crowd was smaller and more subdued than the gala crowd, a mix of artists, critics, and wealthy collectors. Leo felt the same familiar pang of inadequacy as he stepped inside. But this time, he held his head a little higher. He was here for Alara, and that gave him a sense of purpose that transcended his worn suit. He spotted her. Across the room, she was standing on a small stage, talking to a group of people. Her back to him, she was wearing a stunning silver dress that shimmered under the lights. And she looked every bit the powerful, confident woman. She was his heart, ached with a mixture of love and fear. He started to make his way toward her, but was stopped by a familiar face. Julian Croft, the man who had warned him away, was standing by the bar, a smug smile on his face. "I'm surprised to see you here, Mr. Reyes Croft," said his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you not get my message?" Leo just looked at him, his expression unreadable. "I'm here for Alara." Croft's smile faltered for a moment. "You're making a mistake. She doesn't belong in your world. And you certainly don't belong in hers." It's only a matter of time before she realizes that Leo was about to respond when Alara's voice cut through the air. "Julian, that's enough." She was standing right behind them, her eyes flashing with a cold anger Leo had never seen before. Julian's face paled. "What I did was, for the good of the foundation," she took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. "You will not speak to him like that ever again. Do you understand, Julian?" Just nodded, his smugness replaced by a look of pure fear. "Now, if you'll excuse us," she said, taking Leo's arm, "we have something to attend to." She led him away from the bar, leaving Julian standing there, sputtering in her wake. She led him to the front of the room near the stage, where a single handcrafted wooden box sat on a pedestal. The crowd quieted as the head of the museum board stepped up to the microphone to announce the winner of the artisan's grant. Leo's heart was pounding. In his chest he didn't know what was happening, but he had a feeling his life was about to change. Forever, the head of the museum board, a distinguished man with a mane of white hair, cleared his throat and began to speak his voice. Echoing through the silent hall, he spoke of the Foundation's commitment to supporting artists who worked with their hands, who imbued their creations with a sense of soul and purpose. He spoke of the hundreds of submissions they had received from all over the country, each one a testament to the enduring power of craftsmanship. Leo stood beside Alara, her hand still resting on his arm, her touch a small anchor in the swirling sea of his emotions. He felt a sense of dread creeping up his spine. He didn't belong here. This was a world of accolades and recognition, a world that had no place for a small-time carpenter from the other side of town. And this year, the board continued his voice building with dramatic flair. The committee was unanimous in their decision. The winner of the Vance Foundation Artisans Grant is a craftsman whose work is not only technically brilliant, but also deeply imbued with a sense of love and resilience. His pieces tell a story of loss and hope, of strength and vulnerability. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner is Leo Reyes. Leo's world tilted on its axis, the name echoed in his ears, but it didn't register. It couldn't be him. It had to be a mistake. A cruel joke. He looked at Alara, his face a mask of disbelief. But she was smiling at him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Go on," she whispered. "It's you. You want a spotlight." Hit him, and the crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound. He was both deafening and distant. He felt a gentle push from Alara, and he found himself walking toward the stage, his legs moving on their own accord. He felt like he was floating outside of his body, watching a scene from someone else's life. He accepted the wooden box from the board member, his hands trembling. He opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a check. A check for an amount of money that made his head spin. A life-changing amount of money. He was supposed to say something, to give a speech, but the words were lodged in his throat. He looked out at the sea of faces, all of them looking at him with respect and admiration, and then his eyes found Alara's. She was standing in the front row, her face glowing with pride and love. And in that moment everything became clear. This wasn't about the money, this wasn't about the award. This was her grand gesture, her way of showing him that he belonged not just in her world but by her side. He cleared his throat and stepped up to the microphone. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm just a man who likes to build things. I never expected this. I never thought I deserved it." He paused, looking directly at Alara. "But someone very special taught me that your worth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. And that the most beautiful things are often the ones that are a little bit broken." He held up the check, a small smile on his face. "This is amazing, and I am so grateful, but it's not the most valuable thing I've received." This year, he looked back at Alara, his eyes full of a love so profound it was palpable, because the greatest gift I've ever been given is the love of a woman who saw the man behind the sawdust and taught him how to hope again. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then they burst into a thunderous applause that shook the very foundations of the museum. Leo walked off the stage and straight into Alara's arms. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about the cameras or the whispers. He just held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I love you, too," she replied, her own voice thick with tears. And in that moment, surrounded by the trappings of her world, he knew he was finally home. The weeks that followed were a blur of joyful chaos. The news of Leo's win and his heartfelt speech had made him a local celebrity. His workshop was flooded with orders from wealthy clients who wanted a piece of his soulful craftsmanship. He hired 2 apprentices from the local trade school, and his dusty sanctuary was now a bustling hub of creativity and purpose. He and Alara were inseparable, their 2 worlds, merging in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. She would spend her afternoons at the workshop, a smudge of sawdust often on her cheek, as she helped him sand a rude piece of wood, or just sat and watched him work. He in turn would accompany her to foundation meetings, his quiet, grounded presence, a calming influence on the often contentious board. Julian Croft had been quietly dismissed, and Alara was reshaping the foundation in her father's original image, one that valued people over profit. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of the small house Leo had bought with the grant money, a modest but beautiful home with a big backyard. For Maya and a workshop that was twice the size of his old one, Maya was chasing fireflies in the twilight, her laughter echoing in the warm summer air. Alara leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, her hand resting on his. "I have something to ask." "You?" she said, her voice soft. Leo turned to her, a questioning look on his face. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I want to start a new initiative within the foundation," she said. "A program that provides grants and mentorship to single parents who are trying to start their own businesses. I want to call it the Maya Initiative because your daughter taught me that the biggest dreams often come from the smallest hearts." Leo's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, Alara," she smiled. I want you to run it with me. I need your honesty, your integrity, your real-world perspective. I can't do it without you." Leo didn't have to think about it. He knew this was his purpose, his way of giving back, of turning his own struggles into a source of hope. "For others, yes," he said, his voice firm, of course. "Yes." A year later, they stood in the backyard of their home under a string of twinkling lights, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Maya stood between them, a loss of the four-com, a bi-dot-ho, flower girl, in a dress the same sapphire blue as the one she had worn to the gala a year ago. They exchanged vows. They had written themselves simple, heartfelt promises of love and partnership, of building a life together that was both honest and beautiful. As they kissed, a cheer went up from the small crowd, and Maya threw a handful of flower petals into the air. They rained down on them like soft, colorful snow, a perfect ending to their unlikely love story. But it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. A testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful things in life aren't found in grand ballrooms or on glossy magazine covers, but in the quiet spaces between two hearts who are brave enough to see each other for who they truly are. They had found their own kind of magic, not in a fairy tale, but in the real, messy, beautiful world. They had built together, one piece of wood, one act of kindness, one hopeful heart at a time.